Today, we're diving into the future of security for our most critical systems. Things like power grids and manufacturing plants. The software that runs our world has gotten so complex, and keeping it safe, well, it requires a totally new approach. We're talking about integrating AI directly into the way we build things. So let's break down how this all works.
Here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll look at the new software battlefield and see why the old ways of doing security just aren't cutting it. Then, we'll bring in AI as the new guardian, see what benefits it brings, and finally, talk about what this new partnership between humans and AI looks like.
All right, first up, let's get a feel for why securing industrial software has become such a huge challenge. The game has completely changed.
This is a massive mental shift we need to make. We are not talking about single, contained programs anymore. Modern industrial software is this sprawling, tangled ecosystem of interconnected parts, all talking to each other all the time. And that creates a much bigger surface for potential attacks.
I mean, the sheer complexity is mind-boggling. You've got these enormous code bases that are pulling in countless bits and pieces from third-party libraries. You've got APIs connecting dozens of tiny microservices, firmware living on actual physical devices, and all of this is stretched across the cloud and out to the edge. Every single one of those connection points is a potential door for an attacker. It's no wonder the attack surface has just exploded.
So with all this new complexity flying around, it's really no surprise that our old-school security methods are starting to crack under the pressure.
The old way of doing things was, well, it was slow. You had manual code reviews, security audits every now and then, and that kind of worked when you release new software once or twice a year. But that's just not the world we live in anymore. Today, it's all about continuous delivery, pushing out new code constantly. The old methods just can't keep up at that pace. And this growing gap between the old approach and the new reality, it's creating four huge problems that are slowing teams down and putting our most important systems at serious risk. Let's walk through them. First on the list is something called alert fatigue. Old scanning tools are just noisy. They're based on simple rules, so they flag anything that looks even a little bit suspicious. Developers get absolutely flooded with alerts, and the vast majority of them turn out to be false positives. Pretty soon, people just start tuning out the noise, which is dangerous because they might just miss the one alert that actually matters.
The second problem is that these tools have zero context. It's like seeing a single puzzle piece, but having no idea what the final picture is supposed to look like. They might spot a line of code that could be risky, but they don't understand how it connects to everything else. And that means they completely miss the really clever, subtle vulnerabilities, the ones buried deep inside a complex chain of events.
Third, the old way is just painfully slow. You can't ask a person to manually review millions of lines of code every single time a developer pushes a small change. It becomes a massive bottleneck that just grinds that whole continuous delivery pipeline to a halt. It simply doesn't scale, period.
And here's the kicker. The final problem is that security has always been treated like an afterthought. The team goes through the whole process: design, code, test, and then, right at the very end, they run a security scan. Finding a major issue at that stage is an absolute nightmare. It's incredibly expensive to fix and can delay a release by weeks or even months.
Okay, so it's pretty clear the old way is broken. It's too slow, it's too noisy, and it happens way too late. This is exactly where AI comes in, not just as another tool, but as a complete game changer for how we think about software security. Now here's the most important part. AI-powered DevSecOps isn't about running a fancier scanner at the end of the process. It's about embedding intelligent security into every single step of building software. We're talking from the moment the very first line of code is written, all the way through to deployment. So how does AI actually do all this? Well, first, it's amazing at pattern recognition. It can spot the subtle signatures of vulnerabilities across millions and millions of lines of code. Then, and this is key, it adds that missing context. It actually understands how different pieces of the code interact. And here's the best part. It prioritizes the risks, telling developers, hey, fix this one right now. And because it's always learning, it gets smarter over time, which dramatically cuts down on those false positives and finally ends that awful alert fatigue.
So try to think of it less like a security guard who just walks the perimeter a few times a night and more like an immune system. It's a constant, active guardian that's always on, always learning, and always protecting the entire software ecosystem from the inside out.
So now let's talk about the payoff. When you have this active guardian baked right into your process, the good stuff starts to ripple out across the entire development lifecycle.
And really, everybody wins.
For developers, it means finding vulnerabilities the second they're created, which means way less time spent on frustrating debugging. For the application itself, it means it's just fundamentally more secure and more reliable. And for the systems running live in the real world, you get continuous monitoring and much faster incident response. And that means less downtime, which, in the industrial world, is absolutely critical.
And that brings us to our last big idea. We've seen the problem, we've seen this incredibly powerful solution. But what does all this mean for the actual people who build and secure this software?
Now, this is maybe the most important thing to remember. This is not about replacing developers or security experts. Not at all. It's about making them better. It's about augmenting their skills. The AI can handle the massive scale and speed that humans just can't, and that frees up our human experts to focus on the really tough problems, the creative solutions, and the high-level strategy. It's a true partnership.
So we're kind of left with this big question. The old ways of doing things are clearly failing us. The stakes, especially in the industrial world, have never been higher. The technology to build things faster, smarter, and way more securely is here, right now. So the real question isn't if we can do this anymore, it's whether we're ready to embrace it.